This is Sandy Tankus for TOS50.com, the other side of 50. And I'm in Long Island with Dr. Don David Lusterman, illustrious psychologist. And we're going to be speaking with Dr. Lusterman today about couples who find themselves newly retired. Good afternoon, Dr. Lusterman.
Good afternoon to you.
Okay. Generally, in a marriage, our children grow up, the dog dies, and one or both of the couples continue to work. Then there comes a time when both are retired. They're home, they're with each other all day long. What happens?
Terrible things. Unless they really had a lovely relationship before and learned how to be two independent people who brought things into their marriage. The worst enemy of marriage is same old, same old. The best friend of marriage is novelty. So if two people bring novelty to one another because they continue to grow, retirement is a lot of fun. But if retirement means being twinned, spending all your time together, unless you have an amazing marriage, it is probably a road to early psychotic breaks or something because it's just too hard. I treat guys, if it's a lot of companies are too small to have an EAP. So a lot of companies that are just 45, 40 people, I'm their EAP.
What is an EAP?
EAP is the first who's the first line of mental health in a large corporation. He's the I can't remember what it stands for, but he's the person that you go to for 2 or 3 sessions. He's a social worker usually, and then he says, on our insurance plan, you should go to see this fella. Okay. Well, instead of being EAP, I actually end up being this fella. So I meet a lot of people in business, and one of the most frequent questions I am asked by employers is, Joe's a great employee. He wants to retire next year. We don't want to retire for a couple of years for 2 reasons. One, we think he's going to go nuts and drive his wife nuts. And the second is we need him. You know, if he's really got a couple of good years left, and it would not be improper to discourage his retirement, but we don't want to do that either. So very ethically, they're sending me for a real evaluation. What I want to know is, what are the person's interests? How will the person live his day? What's his shape going to be? And the fellow says, oh, I've worked hard all my life. I have to get up at 6 in the morning. I can get up whenever I please. And I don't have to worry so much about taking care of my weight. I'll eat what I like finally. Whatever. Have an image. I don't have to worry. That's the fellow I worry about. He doesn't have a plan. Now, take that and double it. Now, you have to remember, as you said, most couples reach a certain point in their marriage where they're joined at the hip primarily by mortgage and kids. And when that joy is lost, they say, what were we together for again? Wasn't there something about liking each other? And then the fantasy is, we'll retire, and now we'll live happily after. But what happens is, they used to come home with stories. I treated a couple, they were both in the same business. They worked for the federal government. And they went in the same car ride every day for 30 years with 3 other people to the same office. But once they got into the offices, they were on very different floors of the building, and they came back with very different stories. So they had plenty to talk about, but it was always about the business. I was a little limited, and I would try to get them to talk about other things, but they did most things together. They didn't have a lot to bring back. It is important. It's the novelty. So they decide they're going to retire, and they know that it's going to be a problem. So they come to me and they say, from everything we've talked about, we know that if we both retire at the same time, we'll probably kill each other or do something terrible. What we had to do was interesting. We trained them towards retirement, and when they had a little bit more ability to bring novelty to one another, I then said, well, you can't actually retire at exactly the same time. Do I have the right to help your employers stagger your retirement? And amazingly, the federal government said it was okay. So they began by having 1 different day a week that they were home. So they each retired 1 out of their 5 days. Then I had 2 days, but they didn't intersect. Then I had 1 day that intersected, so they were each off 3 days, only 1 of them together. And little by little, they learned how they could develop interests. She took a cooking class, things that they really should have done years ago. But they, instead of having a bad time, they ended up laughing and saying, this is pretty terrific. And they were the ones who told me when they were ready for 5 days. But they were very cautious about it. They would say, we might be, don't give me might. They have to know, because it was so crucial. But that was such fun, because they had to really readjust, and they were cooperative in the process. When people don't do that, sometimes real depression sets in. And if, depression or anxiety are both very contagious.
Are you better off moving to a retirement community or just staying where you are in the community you've always lived
I
in?
worry terribly. There's a man named Seeley who was the first person to really develop tests of stress. One of the major forces in stress is moving.
Well, I
The
see.
actual act of moving, the loss of many things, even more the loss of emotional associations, the place itself, your friends, your friendship network. So to me, you might want to retire at a certain point, but my sense would be the last place that you would like to do is retire, is to move immediately upon retirement, because there are adjustments that need to be made first. There's still another point. I am not a great. I hope. Do you have any sponsors who are retirement communities? Well, okay.
No.
Well, then I feel absolutely free to speak. Problem with retirement communities is there are no children wandering about,
Uh-huh.
and children wandering about are a wonderful thing. Even if just your grandchildren come to visit, there are other children around.
Right.
But it's like you're in a little incubator. I worry about that because it creates more of same old, same old. So it's a source of worry to me. I would hope that people would take time first to begin to savor retirement, which is a wonderful thing if you do it right, and later to then decide what community they would like to move to.
Well, what about moving to a warmer climate or moving closer to your children, who
Good
presumably
idea.
they have moved
Good
away?
idea, but remember, if the act of retirement itself is hard, and the act of moving usually takes people about at least 6, 8 months to finally fully become comfortable with, because it is stressful. So my thought would still be, don't do two stresses at the same time. It's silly. One is enough at a time. Once you master one, you have more courage to go on to the next also, and more knowledge, more skill. It takes skill to be married. And it certainly takes skill to be retired together.
And there are people who say that they retired, they've simplified their life, they're doing much less. For someone like me, for example, really doing much less, I was bored to death. I had to really keep myself very busy, and yet I worry that maybe I'm doing too much. I mean, what is the correct thing in that instance?
Once again, I think that if you do what you love, and that's the healthiest thing in the world. How many people really can say, I don't work because I have to, I work because I love to?
Hmm.
My docs want me to slow down because I've had some health problems all my life, and I've been hearing slow down all my life. Ask me when I'm going to retire. Ask me right now.
When are you going to retire?
Good question. Upon my death. You'll know immediately. It'll be in the papers. A doctor dies sitting in a chair speaking with patients, because that's what's going to happen, because I love this. It's part of me. I can't not do it. So when my docs push me too hard to slow down, I say, you have to be careful. I might slow down a session or two a week, but if you slow me down too much, that's it. And I believe that. I think there are some people who are fortunate and really love to work. I've also discovered something interesting. A cousin of mine was a very important person in a very, very famous industry in the city. She retired when she was 60. By the time she was 61, she was bored to death. And she said to her partner, I think I'm going to begin to become very irritable and unpleasant in our relationship. And she found a group of women who were kindred souls. They were all people who retired at 60 at about the same time. And they got together and they formed a retirement club. And what they discovered was that they all needed to get back to doing something, not for money, only for love. They had a little more freedom that way. And what did they find to do? Something remarkably similar to what they were doing, except they were now doing it to help other people without any thought about remuneration. Lord knows they didn't need the remuneration. It would only screw up their taxes, I think. But it was amazing. So here's a group of women who retired, who began to feel that they were really going to hurt their marriages by their retirement, because they were active people by nature. It wasn't enough to do. She began to clean everything up. He said, what are you doing? I don't know where anything is anymore. That's what happens. So, again, no one size fits all. I would think there's a difference between a person who is dying to retire because work has just been a way of making enough money to go on, get the things you want but not the fun you want. That person should probably discover new things. And the person who loves what he does may change it in some way, but it's still there. I got my ham radio license so that when I slow down, I will have something to do. I actually am on the air once a year at least.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Lusterman, and until we speak next time, it's been a pleasure speaking to you.
And with you as well.